So everyone that I was asking about vegetarian places in Hong Kong would say Mana is the way to go, and I was like, okay, whatever, Mana. Until the moment I actually read their story, which is pretty unique, and you have to check out how badass this guy. So this is the story. In 1989, he has his awakening, and since then, Bobsy has been creating beautiful things and places for this planet. First, green fashion brands. He's saved an island, opened first vegan, vegetarian food places, and brought concepts like raw, gluten-free, organic into the food scene, as well as zero waste, recycling, and inventions such as plastic-free coffee cups. He has won multiple awards, Best Documentary at Hong Kong Film Festival, and he's now designing an even larger Mana Cafe with a stage for events, gatherings, and dreams of opening an even larger place, Babylon, with high ceiling, amazing food, stage for events and gatherings and lounges for people to come together and be the change for this planet through changing their minds first. His slogan now is diet change, not climate change. So let's see what we can learn from him today. Hello and welcome to another ommmsome episode, ommmsome podcast episode. I'm here today with Bobsy, an amazing change maker in his cafe here in Hong Kong. I'm very stoked about it because he's one of those, when I read the story on the wall, I'm like, wow, how badass do you have to be to found that many things in Hong Kong, which is not like a place where you just go with your savings and like, oh, I'm gonna make a change and make a vegan cafe. It's like one of the world's most expensive cities, and I'm like, hey, I wanna build the first vegan cafe. I wanna make a compostable coffee cup. Like, sure, yeah. So let's see what he has to tell us today. Yeah.
Cheers.
So, cheers. I just met him at Mana, and he's a leader of, I think, a very big encouragement and action community. That's what's really, when I read your story, I was like, he's such a badass. Like, how did you make it all happen? Because yogis, we tend to sit and meditate and be in the sun and reflect on energy, but you're doing
action done Babylon.
Yeah, that's what I also listened to. So I was like, I'm
in
inspired.
The heart of Babylon. Yeah, I feel it's my calling. I feel it's my destiny to be here in the heart of Babylon. Babylon, for your viewers, is a symbolic reference to the materialism paradigm in which we live. So Babylon is the heart of this materialistic, non-sustainable, non-ecological, non-spiritual world. And I found that my calling is to be a yogi, to be a peaceful warrior in the heart of Babylon. So to implement change from within the system. So obviously, as a entrepreneur, an eco-entrepreneur operating businesses on the ground, you need to be involved. You need to pay your rents, pay your salaries, get involved with business. But trying to do it in an inspiring way, to show through example that we can operate businesses that are sustainable, that are non-polluting, that are eco-friendly, and above all, businesses that give hope and inspire change. And if you've noticed, in Mana we have these dedicated compost and recycling bins. Well, you as a customer, you have to interact with them. Once you've finished eating, it's your waste. You need to dispose of it consciously in the right bins. So this in itself allows the customers to participate in a solution. So perhaps to answer your question more specifically, some of us have to be peaceful warriors in urban life. And I feel it's my destiny to be one of those.
How did you come to that? Were you always like in action, or were you also sitting a little bit in the cave and being non-action? Because that was a yoga story for you as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, again, sitting in a cave, which is metaphorically speaking, or sitting in a forest, or sitting in Padmasana meditation, you are also taking action. Because you're taking action on a consciousness level. You're generating peace, you're interacting with the global consciousness. So even if you're sitting in a cave meditating, you are taking action, because your thoughts, the energy you transmit from consciousness down to the materialism, and from the materialism up to consciousness, that level in which all human beings interact, mostly subconsciously and unconsciously, on a subliminal level, but nevertheless your impact is happening in that dimension, which impacts the physical dimension very much. And by the way, this is science as well I'm talking about. It's called downward causation. So yeah, I mean, even though you're sitting meditating, you are also taking action. But there is a different type of action to take, and that is fully operating within the system, changing it from within.
And that's what I really admire. That's something that I was like, okay, how do we do that in nowadays in this world? Maybe just being a yogi enthusiast, going to a yoga studio. What is there that we can do those little steps? Because I mean, we talk so much about the consciousness and all that, but practical. And I think you're an expert on that. If you can make a corn cup, was it? Yeah.
Yes.
I was like, I'm not afraid of
These
corn anymore.
straws are made from potato starch.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, the amazing
And
part
they
is
behave like plastic, so they don't crack when you press them. And amazing what we can do with what we already have. We have everything we need right here on planet Earth. We have everything we need to sustainably support 20 billion people, let alone 8 billion people, if we start behaving consciously and intelligently. Because right now the global modus operandus, the social, political, economic systems we have in place are not intelligent. In fact, if we look back in the future, looking back to the present, we're going to look at them as quite barbaric, because any system that harms itself is a default. There's an inherent default within our system, and this system is known as a materialism paradigm. It's a materialism paradigm in which we all operate, regardless of ethnicity or religion or ideology or political affiliation or economic strata. Regardless of that, we are all operating within this materialism worldview that sees everything, including you and me and the beautiful trees and flowers and the stars and everything, made out of matter, physical matter. But scientifically we know that is no longer the case. So we're still operating within a very old paradigm that was invented 300, 400, 500, 600 years ago. But we know that scientifically now that we do not live in a materialism paradigm. We know now that the building block of the universe is not a physical particle, i.e. an atom or a molecule or a quark. We know that scientifically, yet we still operate as if that was a scientific fact. But that was always a scientific assumption at best. But the scientific method took that to be a fact. But now that is shifted, and the shift first started to happen over 100 years ago. But these changes take a long while. So we are operating a global system that is not only non-sustainable, but is also killing us. It's already eradicating millions and millions of species. And it's depleting the oceans. There's no more fish in the oceans. It's deforesting our forests. Forests that are 150 million years old. Forests that are libraries full of knowledge and wisdom. We deforest them. We're wiping out any culture that doesn't operate within the materialism paradigm. So it means we're wiping out ancient cultures, ancient civilizations, what we call indigenous tribes. And we've seen them as barbaric and backwards because they didn't operate within the materialism paradigm. But wait a minute, this materialism paradigm in which we all operate was only an assumption, never a scientific fact. And now science has shown that it is not scientifically hollow ground. Rather, we know now that we live in a consciousness universe, in a consciousness paradigm. But the transition from a materialism paradigm to a consciousness paradigm takes a long, long time.
So how
What you
long
call a
for us?
metanoia, a shift in consciousness. No one can answer that, but if you look carefully today, if you look beyond the headlines and beyond gossip and hearsay and pseudoscience and pseudo-politics, and if you look beyond people's fear, you see a pattern that's been emerging gradually and sustainably for a very, very long time that is impacting all of our minds. And real change happens within the mind. Historically, guns and wars and revolutions have done nothing except misery and harming people and killing people. But historically, we've ever only changed profoundly and deeply and fundamentally when we've changed our minds about something. For example, we changed our minds about slavery. So once upon a time, we all had slaves because we needed slaves to operate the economy. And then eventually, a small number of people changed their consciousness about slaves, and lo and behold, all of humanity now sees slavery as taboo.
Or the black
immoral.
people who have no soul.
Exactly.
When I read that some time ago, I was like,
Exactly.
how could ever human consciousness be like, that one doesn't have a soul? Like hello.
Animals today
Yeah.
in factories, because we eat them, are deemed as soulless people.
Yeah.
Well, this comes from the materialism paradigm that sees animals as nothing but dumb operating creatures that were put on earth by God for man's benefit. Well, this is so not true and so outdated. But this is how humanity changes, is we change our minds about something, and when enough of us change our minds about something, there comes a tipping point. And once we reach that tipping point, reality shifts.
Yeah.
Because reality is reflected by our consciousness. Once upon a time, we all saw the earth to be flat. Lo and behold, the earth was flat. And people believed that if they traveled far enough in a straight line, they would fall off the edge of the earth. So that limited our expansion, limited our development, limited our growth. Until lo and behold, we realized that the earth is not flat, but the earth is a sphere. So that shifted everything. So we are prisoners of our own minds. We are prisoners of our own belief system. As we are, so we believe. And there's an ancient yogic saying that says, what the mind doesn't believe, the eyes won't see. So working around these metaphysical insights, one can see that the mess we're in today is because of our minds, and there's no one to blame except us, you know? And because we are the root of the problem, we are also the genesis of the solution. So as we've created this materialism paradigm in which we all operate, we can uncreate it, and in fact we are uncreating it, and we can replace that outdated paradigm with a much bigger, more holistic, more beautiful, more sustainable, more empowering paradigm, which is called a consciousness paradigm. And therein lies the hope. There is no other hope for humanity unless we all change our minds. And these troubles we're facing in the world today are just making it very obvious to more and more people that the route we're on is utter madness. And as was famously said, you know, one sign of madness is to keep on repeating the same thing and expecting different results.
Yeah.
Well, collectively there is a madness, a psychosis. It's as if we're all being hypnotized by this scientific assumption of a materialism world. Collectively, whether we're communists, socialists, technocrats, whether it's democracy or technocracy or hypocrisy, whatever C and ism it is, we've all been collectively hypnotized by an assumption and not by a fact. So once you change that, once you pivot that, all of our institutions will follow suit. So our institutions of health, of education, of law, of business, they all pivot on a scientific assumption.
So how do you see the future, the consciousness future? If we tomorrow, if we shift the mind as it should be, how does that society look like?
First, to make it clear to your viewers, I don't see the future. I'm glad I don't. And I'm glad the future comes one day at a time. because if it didn't, I would just probably crumble into a massive poo and be unable to function. So I'm glad I don't see the future.
Well, I think I read on the wall when you started your journey, it was like 1989. I was like, I was 1 year old, and you already had that future idea of what you're doing now, which still seems for many like, wow, that's so futuristic. Like compost everything, like wow, like it's possible, and probably it was possible in your mind at that time. As well.
Absolutely. For me, 30 years ago is when I first had my awakening, when I first had my inner transformation that reflected outwardly into everything I do, and I realized 30 years ago that I don't want to be part of the problem, I want to be part of the solution. And I put what little skills I had of graphic design and fashion into action and started an eco-fashion company, and that's how I really began. And for me it was just bloody obvious that what humanity was doing was utter madness, and that it doesn't have to be that way. But I was encouraged by all the signs I could see. I was encouraged by people and people power and the human potential movement. And I was encouraged by NGOs like Greenpeace and Amnesty International and WWF and all these wonderful organizations that were promoting a different way. And I could see it in the raves that were happening. I was in England, in and out of England at the time, and I could see it in the rave parties that were happening, where black and white and Hispanics and we're all dancing to the same beats and just loving each other, and I could hear it in the music, and I was reading in the books, and I was seeing it in the magazines, and I was seeing it on the art graffiti on the walls, and in street fashion and street culture, and it was just everywhere. It was in the air. And I'm like, whoa, everybody, can you see this? You know, I mean, this is beautiful. And a lot of people are like, huh, what are you talking about? Don't you know there's a war going on? Haven't you heard about the economy? And you know, I'm like, yeah, of course, but you know, look a bit deeper and you see this underlying current that is universal. It's not limited to San Francisco or to, you know, Soho in London. This is a universal current that's impacting all of humanity, every country, everywhere, and it's really transforming things from deep within outwards, like the flowering of a flower. And I was so empowered by that, and I said, you know, fuck this, I'm going to do something, you know, I have to do something. I at least share what I can feel, the beauty I'm feeling. And of course, as a result, I started to read about the perennial wisdom, this wisdom that's been around forever. This is nothing new under the sun. You know, the Romantics were expressing that, and I discovered the works of William Blake, you know, my most beloved and most inspiring person, William Blake, the mystic, the poet, the artist. And then you discover the works of Emerson and Thoreau and Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Byron and Shelley and Keats, and then you discover that Einstein was a real hippie, you know, and true, and then you discover the forefathers of quantum physics, Schrödinger and Max Planck and Niels Bohr. And yes, they were hardcore physicists and scientists, but they were also mystics. And you look back and you realize that the greatest people, Leonardo da Vinci, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Jesus Christ, the Prophet Muhammad, Krishna, Buddha, all these great beings that have graced and walked on this planet, all believed in the same universal consciousness. And yet we're in this massive amnesia. We're hypnotized by this materialism paradigm. We are machines in a mechanistic clockwork-like universe. No, absolutely not. We need to just wake up of this hypnotism and just, you know. And that was my message. And I just had so much fun doing it. Fuck, I had no money. I was completely broke, but I was happy. I was doing something, and of course, money eventually comes, and you know, you perhaps get recognized, or you get lucky in business or something, and this movement starts to grow. And eventually, I discovered the power of food and started opening, you know, vegan, plant-based, organic, zero waste, zero plastic restaurants.
Which year was it?
My first one was in 1997.
I was probably like chewing on steak at the time. I can't believe, because that's like, it's a very long ago. And then, you know, I think also Hong Kong, I don't know how, I was in Hong Kong, right? I don't know how Hong Kong was at that time. Probably not like San Francisco, was it?
No, that's why, you know, I said I'm operating in the heart of Babylon, you know,
Yeah.
because Hong Kong is quite a dense, materialistic city, operating very successfully within the materialism paradigm, and perhaps one doesn't equate Hong Kong with yogis and yoginis and a consciousness awakening. But even, you know, 28 years ago when I first came here, the energy was there. You just needed to tap into it.
Yeah.
So I've always said Hong Kong is no exception.
Oh, of course.
You know, Hong Kong, like everywhere in the world, is just deeply operating within this modality, but those currents have always been there, and I tapped into them in Hong Kong. And yes, it wasn't a big movement, but sure enough, like minds, like hearts attract each other, and you recognize your brother, and you recognize your sister, and you recognize people who are on a similar mission, people who really want to make a difference, people who are not doing it for any, you know, selfish reasons, or they're just doing it because they're passionate about what they do. And you recognize that within your brother, your sister, your fellow human being, and that's where the tribe connects.